listener production.
Hello, welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sasha Barbagat. You might have heard the term native title and be aware that when one is lodged, it can create a bit of a stir over concerns it'll take away the rights of non-Indigenous people to the land they live, work and play on. And one has just been lodged that covers a huge part of Melbourne.
There's a really fundamental misunderstanding between the general public's idea of what a native title determination actually does. It's not trying to exclude people from anything.
So amidst the controversy, how much power does a native title really hold? That chat is coming up in the second half of this episode. But first, it is time for the headlines with Chris Spiru. It's Wednesday, the 19th of November.
Hey Sash, and to you listening. If you've been having trouble getting into your playlists, asking ChatGPT to rework an email, or checking if your flight's delayed, you're not alone, and that's because we've been hit with another major internet outage.
Computer says no.
Yes, and the computer saying no is a US company called Cloudflare, which has suffered an outage last night, and it's used by 20% of the world's websites to manage internet traffic, including Spotify, X, Facebook, ChatGPT, Canva, Zoom, as well as the websites for Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide airports.
Yeah, now despite users first reporting problems accessing some of those sites yesterday, Arvo, Cloudflare says its global network began experiencing issues around 11 p.m. last night, triggering widespread errors and taking some major platforms offline. It has since come out to apologise for the outage, saying it wasn't the result of a hack and it has now been fixed.
Which I call BS on. I could not listen to Spotify this morning. I could not listen to Spotify while I was showering last night, and I am devastated.
Well, it's interesting because some users were reporting, like we said, that they couldn't get on yesterday afternoon, but the official outage says 11 p.m. last night.
Correct.
So what is happening?
We have questions, and we demand the answers. But look, we will, I'm sure, find out more this morning. Look, unrelated though, we were experiencing a bunch of major delays at Australian airports yesterday. Now that is a separate IT outage. That's related to Air Services Australia. They're responsible for air traffic across the country. Their automatic processes went down. So a lot of staff at airports in Melbourne, Perth and Adelaide had to manually input a lot of data. So that's why we were experiencing delays there. That is separate to this Cloudflare thing, which has affected airport websites, but not those air traffic things. But,
oh, my Lord.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. But do expect if you are travelling around the country today, you might experience some delays related to that other outage.
Survivors of Jeffrey Epstein have gathered in Washington, D.C. to urge US lawmakers to vote in favour of releasing the full Epstein files. During an emotional press conference on Capitol Hill, the brother of one of the sex traffickers' most high-profile victims, Australian woman Virginia Giuffre, urged them to vote in favour of the release.
My sister is not a political tool for you to use. These survivors are not political tools for you to use. These are real stories, real trauma, and it's time for you to stop just talking about it and act. Vote yes.
Now, at the time of recording this, the vote has not happened yet. We will pop the result up as soon as we get it on our Instagram page, which is at The Briefing Podcast. But what we do know right now is happening is that the House of Representatives will hold the ballot with Democrats and as many as 100 Republicans tipped to vote in favour of releasing this trove of documents, Chris.
Yeah, it's called the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and if passed, it would compel the publication of unclassified documents detailing the investigation into Epstein's operations and his 2019 death in custody, which was ruled a suicide at the time. It is worth noting that even if this does get up in the House of Representatives, the bill will then go to the Senate, and Donald Trump would then have to sign it before it becomes law. Asked a short time before the vote why he hasn't just released the files, which he could do, he slammed the reporter.
You're a terrible person and a terrible reporter.
Before trying to deflect to the Democrats.
I have nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. I threw him out of my club many years ago because I thought he was a sick pervert. You just keep going on the Epstein files. And what the Epstein is a Democrat hoax.
Now, look, earlier in this week, he has flagged that if the bill does come to his desk, he will sign it. But, you know, the language around it today just throws that kind of up in the air. Look, he has stopped trying to pressure Republicans to vote against the bill. And instead, this week, he did tell them to vote in favour of it. And he hasn't given the same directive to his colleagues in the Senate, which is quite interesting as well.
Yeah. Now, Trump has been out of step with his base on this issue for months. And that's why this about face of going, oh, no, Republicans, you should vote for this is really interesting because it's taken him this long to feel the pressure. We've seen the split with Marjorie Taylor Greene and how impactful that has been. And his own vice president, JD Vance, has publicly called for the release of the Epstein files. So why Trump took this opposing stance is confusing, but you can see in how he's been acting this week that he can hear them at the gates and they want this to happen, so he's kind of capitulated. It is thought that these files could either exonerate or incriminate Trump because we talked about it yesterday. There have been rumors for years and years and years about what Trump had to do with Epstein and his island and the, trafficking of young women. So this vote happening after we're recording this, so keep an eye on our Instagram for the result.
Back home now, skilled migrants and international students are in the sights of the coalition as it starts to thrash out details of its immigration policy. After weeks of infighting over net zero and energy policy, the opposition is now moving on to its next big policy reset, with leader Susan Lee saying earlier this week that migration is too high right now and they'll be finalising their position over the coming weeks.
We're now learning what that position could look like, with MPs speaking out about migrants with skills and international students. But some are warning colleagues to be very careful about the language they use in this debate for fear of demonising communities. And it's worth noting, Chris, as well, demonising, huge supporter bases of the Liberal parties. Lots of migrants, back the Liberals and would vote for them in an election if they could. Now, this is all after a former Liberal senator sensationally quit the party yesterday, slamming her colleagues' treatment of Lee and calling some of them lazy and inept. So some swiping from the sidelines now.
Popular gaming site Roblox says it will roll out age verification checks in 3 countries, including Australia, for some of its features. Aussie, Kiwi and Dutch users who want to privately message other users will need to prove their age starting next month by submitting a video selfie before being assigned into one of 6 age groups from under 9s through to 21 plus. And look, this video selfie gets sent and then the AI does its thing and estimates your age, which Roblox says is quite an accurate process. And they do say that that video is immediately deleted after your age has been proven.
Yeah, and this is interesting because we know that social media age ban here in Australia is coming into effect next month on the 10th. Roblox has been exempt from that so far, but the fact that they're bringing in this technology I think is really interesting that, maybe they're starting to play ball and they go, yeah, you know what, we do want to protect our users from possible harm on our platform. Now, these changes were first flagged as a possibility in September, and at the time that was welcomed by our eSafety Commissioner, who said it followed months of negotiations with the site and was proof that the Commission was making platforms safer even without this ban. And that was all amid reports Roblox was being used by predators to target kids and kids were being exposed to unsafe or explicit content there.
And an Aussie company is in the sights of the real Slim Shady, with M&M suing them over their name. Sydney-based Swim Shady has been hit with a lawsuit by the 53-year-old rapper who says their name is too close to his trademarked rap pseudonym.
Eminem's 53. That is horrible to hear. Makes me feel old. The brand earlier this year filed a trademark in the US for the term, which was granted, but Eminem's lawyers then filed a petition to cancel it. He's also filed opposition to Swim Shady in Australia.
Yeah, the deadline for the company to respond is next week, but the company is expected to fight Slim's lawsuit. Now, Eminem first trademarked Slim Shady way back in 1999 in the US, but only filed it in Australia in January this year.
Yeah, so maybe in response to this brand, which, by the way, if you're wondering, sells like umbrellas and like cooler bags and stuff.
Okay.
So, yeah. I always get a bit annoyed when I see these trademark things from like big, huge celebrities and superstars. Eminem's worth around 380 million Australian dollars.
Yeah,
like,
wow.
You're going to go after this company.
I know.
I mean, like, what are they making? Like, they're not worth what you're worth.
Yeah, and very similar arguments were made at the time when Katy Perry launched that trademark lawsuit against Katy with an IE, that Sydney fashion designer.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, your argument there is justified. I'm sure you're not alone in the way you're thinking at all.
Yeah, well, I think so, Chris. But that does bring our headlines to a close for today. We've got Helen Smith's deep dive coming up next, and she is getting us across native titles, what they mean, how powerful they are, and what we can learn about them. That's coming up next. Have a listen.
there are hundreds of native titles across Australia, so why do people get so worked up when a new one's announced? A native title is a property right recognised under Australian law, acknowledging that some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to hold rights and interests in land and waters. And a new claim has just been lodged for Melbourne, with the Wiradjuri Woiwurrung people, who are the traditional custodians of Naarm, Melbourne and its surrounds, taking their case to the federal court. And it follows Victoria signing Australia's first ever treaty with Aboriginal people last week, and the Albanese government committing $75 million to help native title holders secure better deals and faster approvals earlier this year. But how much power does a native title hold? What happens if you're living on land that is about to come under one? And what's the difference between a treaty and a native title claim? Kieren Murray is a Wiradjuri man and lawyer at the First Nations Legal and Research Services. Kieren, how much power does a native title hold, and why are people working for decades to implement them?
To answer this question, I kind of want to talk about how we articulate the word power. The way that we articulate power sometimes, especially in Western contexts, is this idea of, you've got this thing that you can, and it allows you to then wield power over somebody or exercise power in a particular way. I think what native title does, or getting a native title determination, is it kind of recognises an inherent right that traditional owners have over their country and allows them to then, it empowers traditional owners to do the things that they want to do on their country. That is, look after community and look after the land and look after country.
So what are some of those things that you just kind of spoke about there, looking after land, looking after country? What does that look like under a native title?
I guess to step it through, when native title is determined, a prescribed body corporate or an Aboriginal corporation will be assigned as the holder of the native title rights and interests on behalf of the whole traditional owner group. And then that kind of becomes the focal point for administering these things. And so some examples from groups that I've worked with in Victoria, the ranger program. So Aboriginal people will be employed by the corporation to go out in country and kind of look after it in a really practical sense.
And I'll get into some of the process of getting a native title approved in a moment. But firstly, can you explain what the difference is between a treaty and a native title claim?
Yeah, so native title is a federal court determination that recognises land rights over land and waters. It's pretty confined in that sense. It's technically a property right under Australian law, and it kind of only operates in that space of like land rights and property. Whereas a treaty is an agreement between two self-governing groups of people that sort of dictates the terms of that relationship. That can be on a broader range of topics. So treaties will encompass things like education, social welfare, or even things like criminal justice.
We've recently had the Wiradjuri people lodge a claim in Victoria for a native title, but how many native titles are there already across Australia?
As of yesterday, there were 539 positively determined native title claims in all of Australia.
And does a native title change anything for people who might be living on one?
The short answer to that question is no. To kind of explain that, native title is a property right under the Australian legal system, and it operates in the same sphere as all other property rights, that is, including private property rights, which I think is the thing that most people kind of get concerned about when it comes to native title. When native title is recognised, it might be recognised over a broad kind of area of country, and then within that, there's obviously all these other property interests that exist. And on the areas where there is private property, for example, native title doesn't have any effect there.
So when a native title is approved, does that change anything to the public's rights to access the land?
In short, again, the answer is no. It's a little bit more complex in this instance, though, because there are a couple of different kinds of native title that can be determined by the federal court. One of those is exclusive possession native title. And technically, exclusive possession native title, the native title holders could technically exclude people from being able to go onto particular areas of land. But it's really important to remember that one, that's not the case in a lot of instances. And two, where exclusion does occur, it's not something that is done without, a lot of thought or without a very particular purpose that is really geared at protecting country or protecting cultural heritage. Getting awarded native title is not an opportunity for, and it's not seen as this, but it's not an opportunity for Aboriginal people to wield power over people or exclude the public from enjoying access to public lands or national parks or whatever they may be. It's kind of conceptualized as this other thing where Aboriginal people largely just see it as an opportunity to care for country and create opportunities for within their own communities.
Why do you think people get so up in arms about native titles and when they might hear about one getting lodged or claimed?
I think there's a really fundamental misunderstanding between the general public's idea of what a native title determination actually does in practice. I think people don't understand the way that Aboriginal people, the way that we kind of articulate our connection to country and what achieving native title kind of means in that context is not this thing of like trying to take away from anybody else, or it's not trying to exclude people from anything. It's this, what can getting a native title determination achieve for us and our communities? And I guess like lastly, we sort of talk about where we're at in terms of like environmental protection and what we want to achieve in that space as an Australian community. And native title holders are often at the forefront of caring for country in that way and caring for our environment.
And how difficult is it to get a native title approved?
Well, firstly, the native title it's an extremely difficult process to go through. Some groups have been working on their native title claims for upwards of 30 years. It's really, really long and arduous. There's a really huge evidentiary burden that is associated with it, which means there's a really big research undertaking that has to occur, and the standard of proof is really high. So it takes a lot of work from a lot of people within communities and lawyers and anthropologists and things like that are necessary to get a native title claim over the line.
And you mentioned their evidence. So what does that mean when it comes to a native title? What do First Nations and Aboriginal people have to prove to have a native title?
The first and the most important is the oral stories and the traditions and the evidence of culture that exists within the group. And that's something that Aboriginal people can articulate for themselves and forms the basis for what ultimately is like a community. And then because it's within the Australian legal system, those stories on their own, often they don't satisfy the court all the time. And so what needs to then happen is this kind of research undertaking that will look into records from the last kind of couple of 100 years that provide evidence of like a continuing connection to country, will kind of validate some of the stories that have been told, and then will indicate people's kind of lineage and like connection to ancestors. So, there'll be genealogies that are drawn up, other records from colonialists, records like birth, deaths and marriages that kind of indicate where people have lived over a long period of time. It's a really, really big research undertaking, and it's complex how the oral traditions kind of interweave with that, but it ultimately assists in painting a picture of an enduring connection to land over the last couple of 100 years.
How important is a native title for First Nations and Aboriginal people?
It's important for a few different ways, but one thing is that it's kind of this sign of respect from the Australian legal system that it's kind of like, we acknowledge that you have your own systems of laws and you have your own way of existing. We see that and we want to work with you in that space. And I think that's, from a wider Australian community perspective, that's a really positive kind of relationship that our legal system should have with Aboriginal people. The really important point to make is that native title doesn't create that feeling, that feeling of responsibility and that the desire to do things that are positive for your community and the desire to care for country, that's inherent in Aboriginal communities. That just already exists. And what native title does is it gives a vessel for the Australian legal system to recognise it and then to kind of enliven that in a really practical sense.
That was Kieren Murray, a Wiradjuri man and lawyer at the First Nations Legal and Research Services. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could rate and review The Briefing wherever you're listening from. It's a really easy way you can support us and all we do here on the show. And you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.